Human found an alien girl lost in the mist, but what she left on his table at dawn changed him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The mist had rolled in thick that night, folding over the valley like layers of pale cotton as Evan Carter stepped out of his workshop, the wooden porch groaning softly under his boots. The cold brushed against his skin with the gentle bite of early spring, carrying the faint scent of wet soil and pine sap. His generator hummed behind him, its steady rhythm matching the quiet tension that always settled in the valley after midnight. Evan wasn't the kind of man who chased strange sounds in the dark, but the muffled gasp drifting through the fog made him stop. It wasn't an animal. Too soft. Too startled. He lifted his lantern, the warm glow carving a small circle through the silver haze. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the mist parted just a little, as if nudged by a hesitant breeze, and he saw her. A girl. Not human. Not entirely. She stood barefoot in the grass, her skin a muted violet that shimmered each time the lantern light brushed against it. Strands of silver hair clung to her cheeks, wet from the mist. She looked lost, truly lost, her eyes wide with a quiet fear that reached him before any sound did. Evan swallowed, lowering the lantern so its glow wouldn't blind her. "Hey," he said softly, careful with his tone, careful with his distance. "You hurt? You cold?" She didn't answer. She only watched him, chest rising and falling in quick breaths that clouded in the air. When a sudden breeze swept through, she wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. That small, instinctive motion broke whatever hesitation Evan had left. He slipped off his flannel jacket and set it on the ground between them, not handing it to her, not stepping closer, just offering. A gesture without pressure. A choice left to her. The girl blinked, gaze shifting from him to the jacket. Slowly, almost childishly careful, she stepped forward and picked it up. The sleeves swallowed her hands. She pressed the collar closer to her neck, closing her eyes briefly as if savoring its warmth. Evan didn't speak. He didn't ask questions. He only tilted his head toward the porch light and said, "There's heat inside. You don't have to stay, but you can." The girl hesitated, glancing back at the endless wall of mist behind her. Something about that fog seemed to frighten her more than following a stranger. After a moment, she nodded once, small, uncertain, and took a step toward the light. Evan held the door open, standing aside, heart knocking quietly against his ribs. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know where she came from. All he knew was that no one deserved to be alone in that cold. The warmth of the house wrapped around Evan and the girl the moment the door closed, shutting out the mist and the quiet shiver that came with it. The soft hum of the heater blended with the ticking of an old wall clock, steady and familiar. She stood just inside the threshold, her bare feet leaving faint damp marks on the wooden floor. The oversized flannel jacket hung unevenly on her small frame, the sleeves slipping past her fingers. Evan kept his movements slow as he set the lantern on the kitchen counter. The warm light revealed more details now that she was not swallowed by fog. Her violet skin carried a faint, pearlescent glow, like moonlight running beneath the surface. Her silver hair, still clinging to her cheeks, shifted slightly as she turned her head, watching every one of his steps with careful attention. "You can sit if you want," he said, nodding toward the chair by the table. She did not move at first. Her eyes drifted across the room, pausing on objects as if trying to understand their purpose. The kettle on the stove, the small radio, the row of tools hanging over the workbench by the window. Her gaze returned to him, questioning but not hostile. Evan pulled out the chair and backed away to give her space. After a moment, she walked to it and eased herself down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. He poured warm water over a packet of herbal tea, the steam spiraling gently toward the ceiling. When he set the mug in front of her, she leaned forward slightly, inhaling the scent with cautious curiosity. "It is warm," he said, tapping the side of the mug lightly. She studied him, then touched the ceramic with the tips of her fingers. Her posture softened, just a little. Evan took the seat across from her, leaving a respectful distance. For a while, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the soft ticking of the clock, the faint whistle of wind brushing against the windows, and the gentle clink of the mug when she lifted it with both hands. She sipped carefully, as though afraid she might break something or misunderstand some unseen rule. The warmth seemed to calm her. Her shoulders lowered. Her breathing steadied. Evan noticed the subtle tension in her movements, something deeper than cold or fear. She was not just lost. She was trying to stay hidden from something. He did not ask. Instead, he set a small plate of crackers between them, sliding it closer with the same careful calm he had used outside. She tilted her head slightly, then reached for one, examining it before taking a tiny bite. A barely visible surprise flickered across her expression. Evan smiled faintly. Not bad, right? She blinked, as if trying to interpret the tone. Then, for the first time, she made a small sound. Soft. A breath of acknowledgement. Almost a thank you. The clock ticked on. The mist pressed lightly against the window panes. And in the quiet kitchen of a man who had not welcomed company in months, the strange girl sat across from him, warming her hands on a mug she did not know the name of, slowly letting the weight of the night slip from her shoulders. For the first time, Evan saw something in her eyes that had not been there before. Trust, forming like a fragile thread in the warm air between them. The girl's hands had stopped trembling by the time the tea cooled, but the silence between her and Evan grew heavier in a different way. A quiet weight shaped by questions neither of them knew how to approach. The heater clicked softly, pushing warm air across the room, brushing past her silver hair where it draped over the flannel collar. She traced a fingertip along the rim of the mug, not drinking now, just feeling the heat fade. Evan watched her carefully, not wanting to startle her. The mist outside had begun to thin, revealing the faint outline of the pine ridge beyond the porch. Dawn was approaching, though the valley always held on to its shadows longer than the sun. She shifted slightly in the chair, her eyes wandering toward the window. The moment her gaze met the thinning fog, a flicker of worry crossed her face, faint but unmistakable. Evan leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, keeping his voice low. You do not want to go back out there, do you? She did not answer, but her hand tightened around the mug, a small gesture that told him everything. He exhaled slowly. Whatever she had run from was not just the cold. Something else lived in that fog, something she feared enough to follow a stranger inside his home. Evan stood, moving toward the small cabinet by the wall, and retrieved a soft towel. He held it out, without stepping closer than a respectful distance. You are soaked through. You can dry off if you want. She hesitated, eyes darting between him and the towel, then gently reached out and took it. Her fingers brushed his for only a moment, cool and feather-light, but she pulled back as if unsure she was allowed the contact. She rose from the chair with slow, deliberate movements, wiping the mist from her hair and the sleeves of the jacket. Evan noticed how she kept her back angled away from the window, as though expecting something to be watching her from the thinning fog. When she finished, she folded the towel neatly and set it on the table, aligning its edges with careful precision. It was such an intentional, almost ceremonial gesture that Evan realized she was trying to show respect in the only language she knew. Thank you, he said softly. Her eyes lifted to meet his. For the first time, he saw something other than fear in them. Something observant, studying him the way one studies a new landscape or a map with unfamiliar markings. She opened her mouth slightly, as if trying to form a word, but no sound came out. Instead, she raised one hand, placing it gently over her chest. Then she touched the edge of the table between them. A simple gesture, but it carried meaning. Her name, or maybe trust, or maybe both. Evan nodded slowly, understanding more than either of them had spoken aloud. I am Evan, he said, touching his own chest. She watched his hand, then repeated the gesture on herself, confirming she understood the exchange. A soft sound escaped her, almost like a murmur shaped into the closest thing her voice could manage. Leary. He repeated it quietly, letting the name settle in the warm air. She blinked, surprised he said it gently. Outside, the fog continued to pull away from the valley floor, but she did not look back toward it again. Instead, she watched him with the steady, cautious focus of someone who had decided, for the moment, that she was safe exactly where she was. Morning settled gently over the valley, washing the wooden walls of Evan's small home in a soft gold that mixed with the lingering gray of the thinning mist. Leary stood by the window, her fingers lightly touching the glass as she studied the world outside. Her breath left faint shapes on the cool surface before fading. She seemed calmer now, though her shoulders still carried a quiet tension, as if the fog itself might reach back for her at any moment. Evan moved slowly around the kitchen, preparing something simple for breakfast. He cracked eggs into a pan, the sizzle faint but steady, blending with the soft hum of the heater. He was careful not to make sudden noises. Every small sound made Leary tilt her head in that curious, attentive way unique to her. She watched the rising steam from the pan, her eyes reflecting its warm glow. When he slid a plate onto the table and motioned for her to sit, she approached with deliberate steps, as though taking in every inch of the space between them. She examined the fork first, turning it gently between her fingers before copying his movements, lifting small bites of food with a concentration that made Evan smile quietly. She did not rush. She tasted each bite like she was learning not only the flavor but the shape of a human meal, the ritual of it. At one point, she paused, looking directly at Evan. Her expression softened, the corners of her eyes warming just slightly, and she tapped her chest again. "Leary," she whispered. Her voice was clearer than before, though, still wrapped in a delicate uncertainty. Evan nodded. "Good morning, Leary." She repeated the phrase softly, attempting each sound carefully, and though the words came out imperfect, she seemed pleased that he understood. After breakfast, Evan grabbed his tool jacket from the hook near the door. He glanced at the generator gauge through the window. "I need to check the line outside. It will only take a moment," he said, gesturing to the side of the house. Leary's eyes widened slightly. Her hand lifted toward him, fingers curling a little, as if asking without words whether she should stay. The simple trust in that gesture tugged at him. "It is all right," he assured her gently. "You can come with me if you want." She hesitated, then nodded, pulling the flannel jacket tighter around herself. The two stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking softly beneath them. The valley air met them with a cool breath, carrying the last threads of mist that curled lazily around the pine trunks. Leary stayed close, her steps almost silent on the wooden planks. She watched him kneel beside the generator panel, her violet skin catching the early sunlight in subtle iridescent tones. A slight fluttering sound made her glance sharply toward the trees. Evan looked up, sensing her shift in mood. "It is just birds," he said quietly. "They always sound louder in the morning." She listened, head tilted, the breeze pushing a few strands of her silver hair across her cheek. The fear that had clung to her since the night before seemed to ease as she studied the tree-line, realizing nothing there wished to harm her. When Evan stood, brushing dust from his hands, she stepped closer, tapping the edge of the flannel jacket, then patting her chest. A gesture he recognized now. "This is safe." Evan nodded. "Yeah," he said, voice warm. "You are safe here." The morning light wrapped around them both, gentle and unhurried, as if the valley itself agreed. The rest of the morning passed with a quiet rhythm, the kind that settled into the wooden bones of the house and wrapped itself around the two of them like a soft blanket. After checking the generator, Evan led Leary back inside, where the warmth chased the last chill from her skin. She glanced around the room again, slower this time, as if each object was no longer a threat but a question she wanted to understand. He noticed the way her fingers brushed over the edges of the table, the way she paused to study the framed photograph of his father on the shelf, the way she tilted her head when the radio crackled softly to life. When a gentle melody played, something with a slow guitar and a steady heartbeat of drums, she moved closer, listening with such focus that even the smallest notes seemed amplified in her expression. Evan adjusted the volume, making it quieter so it would not overwhelm her. "Music," he said, tapping the radio lightly. "It helps the house feel less empty." She reached toward the speaker, stopping just short of touching it, feeling the vibration through the air instead. Her eyes widened slightly, reflecting the warm glow from the lamp beside them. A soft, almost humming sound slipped from her, as if she was trying to echo the melody. Evan smiled. "You like it?" She looked at him, her expression open and curious, and then nodded once, a small but confident movement. He pulled out a chair for her near the workbench, where scattered metal parts rested from a project he had meant to finish weeks ago. When he sat beside her, she leaned forward to study the tools. He held up a wrench. "This tightens things." She watched closely. He turned a bolt with it, the metal clicking gently. She reached out, touching the cool surface of the wrench, then tracing the bolt head with one careful fingertip, trying to understand how the pieces fit. Evan guided her hand, not touching her directly, but showing the motion slowly. She repeated it with surprising precision, her movements delicate but sure. "You are a quick learner," he said softly. The corner of her mouth lifted just slightly, the closest thing to a smile he had seen on her yet. Hours passed that way, with him showing her simple things and her absorbing every detail like a sponge soaking up warm water. She learned the warmth of a mug, the sound of a turning bolt, the faint static coming from the radio, and at one point she placed her hand over the heater vent, eyes closing as the warm air brushed her skin. In the early afternoon, sunlight stretched across the wooden floor, and Leary followed its movement like a cat watching a beam of light. She stepped into the warm patch, letting it touch her face. The change in her posture was immediate. Calm, peaceful. She placed her hands together, lifted them slightly toward the sunbeam, then lowered them toward her heart, repeating the soft gesture she had shown him that morning. Evan stood quietly, watching her with a mixture of awe and something he could not quite name. She turned to him, her violet eyes steady and clear, and tapped her chest once more. Then she touched the sunlit floor between them. "Safe. Here. With you." Evan exhaled slowly, feeling the truth of it settle deep inside him. Whatever had driven her into the mist, whatever fear she carried, was beginning to loosen under the warmth of this small, ordinary day. And without thinking, he tapped his own chest in return, mirroring her gesture with slow sincerity. She blinked, surprised, then placed her hand gently over the flannel jacket she wore, as if holding the new meaning close. In that moment, the quiet connection between them deepened, as natural as sunlight drifting across an old wooden floor. The sun had climbed higher by early afternoon, stretching soft lines of light across the wooden floorboards and warming the house in a way that made the air feel gentler, almost drowsy. Leary moved through the glow with an ease she had not shown the night before, her steps slow and deliberate, as if she was learning the rhythm of the space. Evan watched her from the workbench, tightening a loose screw on an old lamp he had meant to repair. His tools clinked quietly, each sound small enough not to startle her. She drifted toward the radio again, drawn to the soft melody that played. When she hovered her hand above the speaker, she let the faint vibration run through her fingers, her expression shifting with quiet wonder. Evan found himself smiling without meaning to. She was discovering the world the way someone learns to breathe after a long time underwater. "It is called music," he said again, though she already seemed to understand. She glanced at him, then tapped her chest and mimicked the rise and fall of the melody with a soft hum. "Not perfect, but close." "You have a good sense of tone," he said gently. She tilted her head, interpreting his tone rather than his words, and let out another hum that carried a small, warm note. Eventually she wandered to the bookshelf where he kept a few old manuals and a worn field guide of regional birds. She picked up the bird guide, running her thumb along its edge, then looked at Evan as if asking permission to open it. He nodded. "Go ahead." She settled into the chair near the window, flipping through the pages with care. The pictures seemed to hold her attention more than the text, especially the ones showing wings spread in flight. She traced the outlines of feathers lightly, her eyes softening with something he could not name. After a few minutes, she tapped the picture of a small mountain wren and pointed outside. Evan stepped beside her, looking out the window. "They like the pine branches," he explained. "You might hear them at dusk." She listened intently, committing the sound of the bird's name to memory even if she could not yet pronounce it. The day carried a peaceful stillness, but beneath the calm, Evan sensed there was more to Leary's silence than language or caution. Something sat behind her eyes that weighed her down gently, like a shadow she had accepted but not escaped. When she closed the book and set it down, she lifted her hands and formed a shape in the air, slow and intentional. She drew a circle, then placed her palms together and pressed them downward, her brows tightening slightly. Evan watched, trying to understand. She repeated the gesture, slower this time. A circle. Descent. Pressure. She tapped her chest, then pointed toward the fog outside, now only lingering in thin strands. Evan felt a quiet chill settle at the base of his spine. She had not simply wandered into the mist. She had fallen into it, or been pushed. The meaning hung between them, unspoken but heavy. Leary lowered her hands, looking at him with a mix of apology and hope, as if unsure whether he would turn away now that she had revealed this small piece of truth. Evan shook his head gently. You are safe. Whatever happened out there, you are safe here. Her breath caught, subtle but visible, and she placed a hand over her heart in a gesture he had come to recognize. Gratitude. And then she pointed to him. Trust. Outside, a distant bird called from the tree-line, and the sound settled softly into the quiet room as Leary lowered her hand, relief washing through her features like sunlight breaking through morning haze. The late afternoon light slanted across the valley, warm but thin, the kind of light that hinted the day was quietly slipping toward evening. Inside the house, the air felt still, as if holding its breath along with the two figures standing near the window. Leary had settled on the edge of the chair, her hands resting lightly against her knees. The earlier calm in her posture wavered now, replaced by a faint unease that pulsed through her movements. Evan noticed it immediately. She kept glancing toward the tree line, where the last threads of fog drifted like pale ghosts between the pines. He stepped closer, keeping his voice gentle. Something is bothering you. She did not speak, but her fingers tightened just slightly. She lifted her hands and repeated the gesture she had shown him earlier. A circle, a downward motion, pressure. But this time, she added something new. She brought her hands wide apart, palms facing outward, then closed them slowly, drawing the space inward. The motion carried weight, like two forces pushing against each other. Evan studied her, piecing together the silent language she had been teaching him without meaning to. Two, he murmured. Two things. Coming together. Or closing in. Leary's eyes widened with relief that he understood even a fragment. She nodded, then pointed toward the forest again, her breath hitching softly. A low hum drifted through the trees, barely audible, more like a vibration than a sound. Evan froze. It was subtle, easy to mistake for wind, but it was steady, rhythmic, unnatural. Leary stepped back from the window, her shoulders tensing. The color in her violet skin shifted faintly, like a soft ripple under moonlight. Evan moved to the back door and opened it just enough to listen more carefully. The hum deepened slightly, then faded, as though whatever caused it had moved farther away. When he closed the door, she was watching him with wide, questioning eyes. I heard it, he confirmed quietly. You are not imagining it. She let out a breath that trembled at the edges. Not fear alone. Recognition. Evan sat across from her, lowering himself slowly so he would not seem rushed. Leary, he said softly. Are they looking for you? Her chin dipped in a small, pained nod. Then she pulled the flannel jacket closer around her shoulders, as if bracing against a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. She mimed another gesture, tracing a line across her forearm and then holding her hand out as though something had been taken away. Her eyes softened with a quiet sorrow that made Evan's chest tighten. She was not simply lost. She had been separated, maybe displaced, maybe abandoned. The thought twisted inside him. He had no idea who they were or what they wanted, but he knew Leary did not want to return. Her body language made that unmistakable. She looked at him once more, searching his face for something he did not fully understand. Reassurance. Or maybe a promise. Evan nodded slowly, firmly. You are safe here, he said again, his voice steady even as uncertainty curled inside him. I will not let anyone take you against your will. Leary's eyes glimmered, a soft reflection of the fading light outside. She lifted her hand to her chest, not tapping it this time, but pressing it firmly, as if anchoring herself to the moment. Then she reached out just slightly, her fingers hovering near his hand without touching. It was not fear, not hesitation. A silent thank you, a silent plea, a silent bond. Outside, the last of the fog drifted back into the trees, as if choosing to hide whatever moved within it. Inside, the world had become very small, just the two of them and the weight of a promise neither had spoken aloud but both now carried. And as the shadows lengthened across the floorboards, Evan knew the calm of the day was fading, making room for something heavier drawing near. Evening settled over the valley with a quiet that felt heavier than usual, as if the air itself sensed something approaching. The last light of day stretched across the floor in long golden stripes before slowly fading, leaving the house bathed in the warm glow of a single lamp near the workbench. Leary stayed close to Evan, her movements small and careful, her violet skin reflecting the dim light in soft waves. She kept glancing toward the windows, listening with a sensitivity he could not match. The earlier hum that had drifted through the trees had not returned, but its memory lingered in the silent tension between them. Evan brewed a pot of warm herbal tea, letting the steam curl into the air in soft white ribbons. When he handed Leary a cup, her fingers wrapped around it gently, grateful for the warmth. She held it, as if the heat itself anchored her. He sat across from her at the table, the two of them reflected faintly in the darkened window. "You can tell me whatever you want," he said, not expecting words but offering space. She remained quiet for a long time. Then she lifted one hand and formed the familiar circle in the air. But this time, she added another motion. She pushed her palm forward, slow and controlled, as though representing something moving away. Then she brought her hand back sharply to her chest, her expression tightening. Evan studied her. "You were sent away," he said softly. "Not by accident." The flicker in her eyes confirmed it. She tapped her chest once, harder than before, then pointed upward toward the sky. Not a gesture to the ceiling, but beyond it. Beyond the valley. Beyond Earth. Evan felt a quiet ache in his chest. She was far from home. Too far. Leary set the cup down carefully, then lifted both hands and shaped something small between her fingertips. A sphere. She held it as if it were fragile. Then she placed it on the table, her fingers hovering over the wood. Her movements slowed, softened. A memory. Evan leaned in slightly. "You lost something," he murmured. "Something important." Her eyes lowered, and a soft tremor moved through her shoulders. She spread her hands apart, miming something slipping away from her grasp, then tapped her chest again. Something that belonged to her. Something taken. She looked at Evan, her expression filled with a deep vulnerability, as if she feared he might judge her or turn away. Instead, he nodded silently, acknowledging what she could not say aloud. Leary reached for something tucked beneath the flannel jacket and brought out a small object, no larger than a stone. Its surface shimmered with a subtle violet light, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. She placed it in the center of the table. Evan stared at it, mesmerized. The glow reflected off her palms, casting faint beams across the wooden surface. "Is this what they are after?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head slowly, pressing a hand to her heart. Something more. Something deeper. Something that lived inside her memory rather than her hands. She lifted the glowing object again and held it near him. When he leaned closer, the light brightened, revealing swirling patterns inside like faint constellations. For a moment, the room felt suspended in time, the glow washing everything in a soft lavender hue. Then a subtle vibration rippled through the floorboards, faint but unmistakable. Leary's head snapped toward the window, her breath catching. Evan felt it too now, a distant hum returning through the trees, threading itself into the evening air. She closed her fingers around the glowing object, hiding its light, and looked at him with an expression that held both fear and an unspoken plea. Evan breathed out slowly. "Whatever happens," he said, steady and calm, "you are not alone." The humming in the distance grew just slightly stronger, weaving itself into the quiet of the house like a warning carried by the night breeze. The hum outside deepened into a low, steady vibration, threading itself through the walls and settling into the floorboards beneath their feet. Night had gathered fully now, laying a soft darkness across the valley, broken only by the faint glow of the lamp near the workbench. Leary stood near the center of the room, her hands curled protectively around the small, glowing object, its light dimmed beneath her fingers. She looked smaller somehow, not in stature but in the quiet way her shoulders had drawn inward, as if bracing for something she had hoped would never reach her here. Evan stepped beside her, his presence steady, calm. He listened carefully, trying to determine the direction of the sound, but the vibration seemed to come from all around them, like the valley itself was humming. Leary lifted her head, eyes fixed on the window, but she did not move toward it. Instead, she turned back to him and opened her hand just enough for the soft violet glow to escape. The swirling patterns inside the object pulsed faster now, reacting to something beyond the house. She placed the glowing sphere gently on the table, her fingers lingering on its surface before she pulled her hand away. The light spread outward in delicate ripples, faint as breath. Evan watched the patterns shift, forming shapes he could not understand, like constellations rearranging themselves. Leary reached for his hand, but stopped. Before touching, her fingers hovering inches away. She tapped her chest once, slowly, her eyes locked onto his. Then she pointed to the object. A memory. A truth. Something she wanted him to understand. Evan leaned closer. The glow brightened, and for a moment he saw gentle images forming in the air above the sphere, faint as mist. A landscape of silver trees under unfamiliar stars. A tall structure shaped like a rising wave. Figures standing around Leary, not hostile, but distant, faces marked with symbols that flickered like living light. She stood among them, younger, or perhaps simply unburdened. Then the image shifted. A rift in the sky. A pull of force that tugged at her body, dragging her away from the others. Not violence. Not punishment. An accident. A tear between worlds. She had not been sent away. She had fallen through. Evan felt the truth settle into him with gentle weight. Leary's eyes glistened as the image faded, leaving only the soft pulse of the sphere. She stepped back, breathing unsteadily, her voice a fragile whisper. Home. The hum outside grew stronger for a brief moment, then dimmed again, like a tide pulling back. Leary looked toward the window, then turned to Evan, her expression torn between longing and fear. The sphere pulsed once more, and in that soft glow he saw the truth she had not been able to share. The hum was not something searching for her. It was something opening. A passage. A chance. She tapped her chest lightly, then extended her hand toward him, palm up, offering him something that had no words. Gratitude. Connection. A silent goodbye. Evan's breath caught, but he nodded slowly. If it is your way home, he said softly, you should go. Her eyes softened, shimmering in the lamplight. She stepped closer, placing her hand lightly over his heart, her touch cool and gentle. It lasted only a moment, but it settled deep, like a promise carried in silence. Then she turned toward the door, opening it with careful hands. The night air swept in, cool and faintly tinged with the last scent of pine and mist. Outside, the hum grew faint again, like a signal waiting only for her. She stepped onto the porch, paused, and looked back at him one last time. The sphere glowed brightly in her hand. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. Then the light swelled, surrounding her in a soft violet haze. When it faded, the porch was empty. Only the quiet remained. Evan stood in the doorway, the night stretching before him. On the wooden table inside, a faint glow lingered where the sphere had rested, and beside it lay something she had left behind. A single silver strand of her hair, shimmering softly in the lamplight, warm at its center like it carried her heartbeat still within it.